Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar with PHIUS Certification Manager, Lisa White, on importing SketchUp files to WUFI Passive. Please check out our website at phius.org. This webinar is possible with the generous support of the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation. And special thanks to the Passive House Alliance Platinum level sponsors, Building Science Corporation and Rocky Mountain Institute. Thank you as well to our silver level sponsors, Mitsubishi Electric and Casella Dorkin. You will earn 1 CPHC CEU for watching this presentation. And with that, I will hand the controls over to Lisa White, and we'll start this webinar. Hang on one second.
All right, good morning or good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lisa White, for those of you who have not met. I am the Certification Manager at PHIUS here, and I'm just going to do a brief webinar on how to use the SketchUp import tool for WUFI Passive. So this is just showing SketchUp, and this is what it looks like in WUFI Passive. So a general overview for WUFI Passive, for those of you who might not have used the tool before, it's our energy modeling tool we use for certification. There are two main sides to the software. There's a static side, which is also called the Passive House verification side. That is the side we'll be creating the 3D import for the SketchUp import for today. There's also a dynamic side, which is also called WUFI Plus. I just want to outline a couple of differences because there can be differences in how you draw the SketchUp model or the geometry depending on what type of model you're running. First off, just in general, the static side uses the monthly climate data set, so you're looking at an annual energy balance with the static side. Dynamic side uses an hourly climate data set or 8765. Shading in the static side, again, the side we'll be looking at today, the side we use for certification. You input all shading parameters manually, so this means if there's an overhang on the window, we still input that the overhang is 4 feet deep and a foot above the window, or whatever it happens to be. It does not automatically take this from the 3D visualization yet. The dynamic side does. It calculates shading from the building elements. There is a pre-processing tool that is in the works with Fraunhofer where all the shading will come directly from building elements, which we're pretty excited about, but it's not implemented yet. So right now we're still implementing all shading elements, or inputting all shading elements in the static side. Interior partition walls, you do not need to draw these in the static side of the version, or static side of the software. It might be useful in the dynamic side, just because it adds to the thermal mass or maybe hybrid buffering capabilities of your different components, but you could also input as non-visualized components. So you really never need to draw interior partition walls unless you're creating multiple zones, which I will show you in a bit. You need to be able to assign where one zone stops and where the next begins. So that's why you would create these partitions. And then spaces maybe like a vented attic or a garage or a sunroom. You don't necessarily need to draw these in the static side of the software. We kind of just always conservatively assume it's the same temperature as outside air, like your garage or a sunroom. So if you do draw them in the static side, they come in as an attached zone, and they don't really affect the overall energy balance. In the dynamic side, you can actually simulate the condition in this zone, so you can just add it as an actual simulated zone, and then get a more accurate reduction factor, which means these spaces are unheated, but maybe they're not exactly the same temperatures as outside air, but they're not inside air either. They're not conditioned space. So they're somewhere in between the temperature, and that's how you would determine this reduction factor between the outside and inside spaces. And also, those of you who've not seen WUFI Passive, this is what the user interface looks like. Section 1 here is the tree and branch structure. Section 2 is the input mask. Section 3 is the 3D visualization. This is the only portion we'll really be looking at today. And then Section 4 is the results screen. Okay, so just a brief agenda of what we're going to go over. First, I'm going to show you how to download the SketchUp plugin. This comes with the WUFI Passive software. So I'll show you the steps. We'll go through the steps of doing that in case you want to follow along. Oh, I need to mention also, I attached this this PDF of these slides to the webinar. You might see handouts along the right-hand side in your GoToMeeting app over here. If you don't, Katrina said she'll send it out with verification that you attended the webinar. But I won't cover all of these slides, but I'll do it. I'm rather just going to do a live tutorial. It's more useful, but everything you can reference in these slides. So if you can't download it from the handouts, we can send it via email. Okay, back to here. So after we download the SketchUp plugin, I'm going to show you guidelines for drawing the SketchUp model. So, you know, how do I draw the walls? How do I draw the windows? How do I draw the frames? You know, all these different questions. I'll show you how to assign WUFI Plus properties. So these come in with the plugin that you get with SketchUp. So I'll show you how to assign properties. I'll show you how to save the SketchUp file into a meaningful file type that imports into WUFI Passive. We will look at some geometry after it's already imported into WUFI Passive to kind of just do a quick check that everything went in, or imported okay, and that everything looks reasonable. You know, checking orientation, checking that everything's facing the right direction. You'll see you can assign it facing one direction or the other and make sure all of that is okay. I'll show you a multi-zone model setup in SketchUp. So basically, I'll just show you a larger building where we zoned out some of the worst case apartments and how you would actually set that up within the SketchUp model. And then I'll show you a trick for inputting windows on large buildings. So as we've gotten to modeling significantly larger buildings, import time is a bit longer when you're importing like thousands of components. So there is kind of a trick if you have a pretty uniform building facade on how to draw these windows in your 3D visualization. All right, so first off, I'm going to show you how to download the WUFI Plus plugin. So the first thing you have to do is run your WUFI Passive file or your WUFI Passive program as administrator. I'm going to try to find that here. You do that by going to the icon for WUFI Passive. So I'm going in my desktop for the icon. You can also go in your Start menu and right-click on that program in your Start menu. I'm going to go to my icon and I'm going to go to my WUFI Passive. Right-click, Run as Administrator. And this allows you to download the plugin. If you're not run as administrator, sometimes you will get an error. And then that should usually automatically launch WUFI Passive. Okay, so now I have WUFI Passive open. For those of you who don't have it, don't worry about it. You don't need to follow along here. I'm going to go into Options, SketchUp Plugin. And then anyone that hasn't used it will have this box unchecked. I will check the box, and one of two things will happen. So either your program will be smart enough and it will find the extension folder for your SketchUp plugins, or it won't find it. So if it does find this folder, you'll see some text populated here, and it should look like a plugin folder to the SketchUp program files. You can simply click Group Components and then Install Plugin, and it should successfully install. If this does not show up, so this is blank, you're going to need to open SketchUp, and basically we're following the instructions right up here. So we open SketchUp, and SketchUp will tell us where that folder is. So I'm going to go to SketchUp. I'm just going to open one of my files I've opened. Window across the top, down to Ruby console. I already have this open. Okay, I'm going to open a different one. So I'm going to go to Window, Ruby console, and it should come up blank. I'm going to go back to WUFI Passive, and it tells you to copy and paste this line that says SketchUp find _ support _ file plugins. I'm going to copy that, go back to my SketchUp where I have Ruby console open. I'm going to paste, and I'm going to click enter, and it gives me this extension, the file extension for the SketchUp plugins folder. So I'm going to copy everything after this C colon, so the program file C. Copy. Going to go back to WUFI Passive. Paste it in this box. And then I can successfully install the plugin. This is all outlined in these slides as well. So that is installing the plugin. Let's just go step by step through it, which you will be able to see once you receive this PDF. Okay. The next thing we need to do is prepare our SketchUp model. So the first case we're going to look at is a single family residence. This is what it looks like. There's a vented attic condition up here. We've got this shading element on the front along the south. And it looks like it has this like screen room or sunroom along the northwest over here. Okay, so I'm going to go into SketchUp, and I've already drawn this building here. And there's a couple of things to note. So first thing you probably notice is this looks very, very simplified relative to this. Everything is a single plane. So each wall is just a single plane here. So let's see if I hide this. Like these are just single planes. There's no thickness associated with these walls. Windows are just boxes or whatever shape they are drawn onto the wall. They need to be in the same plane. Each component is a different clickable component. So you can see I'm clicking around and I'm getting these little blue dots showing me I've selected that component. This is drawn to the exterior of the thermal envelope. So what that means is this wall is drawn here. This exterior boundary is the exterior of the wall installation. So that would be like right before a rain screen, depending on your facade there, wherever the thermal envelope ends. So this is the exterior of the wall insulation, or the exterior of the thermal envelope, thermal boundary. This is the under slab insulation, so the bottom of the under slab insulation. So you can see it's pretty far from that door there, so there's probably a slab and then insulation. And this is the top of the attic insulation. So you'll also notice we didn't draw this roof. We could have, but the thermal envelope actually ended at the top of the insulation there, and it's vented with outside air. So we just, for simplicity, left that roof off. Again, we could draw it in, but it would become an attached zone, and it wouldn't really affect the overall energy balance on the static side of the software. Okay. When looking at windows, it's important to note you don't draw the window frames. Each of these components becomes an imported component in WUFI Passive. So we kind of build in from the exterior dimensions here. So you pick the actual, either the rough opening or the window dimension, probably window dimension. It shouldn't be too different. So we draw in from that in our WUFI Passive model. So you always do the whole window dimension, no frames. Okay, so this is just a slab on grade. So all of these are actually assigned to outer air on the outside. But if there was a basement or some sort of ground condition, it would look a little bit different. So I'll show you that real quick. Okay, so I'm going to just extrude this basement. Oops, I selected on the window. Okay, so I'm going to just extrude this basement a little bit. See if I can beat something. Okay, so one important thing to note is if there's different wall types, you need to make a separation line on the SketchUp model. So let's say I have a foundation wall, and it's a certain height. I need to make that a different clickable component if it's a different assembly than this above grade wall. So I drew a grade line here. So it needs to be different and clickable because we assign different assemblies to it when we get it into WUFI Passive. So I drew a foundation wall there, and I'll just go around and go around and do that for the entire facade here. While I'm doing this, I might note that, let's say you have like a rim joist condition or something like right above this. You will not make that a separate component or a separate like sliver, I guess, in the WUFI passive model. The real way to account for something like that is a thermal bridge calculation. So don't do the little like sliver like this and say this is your rim joist and create a different assembly for it. Yeah, it would be a thermal bridge calculation rather than doing that. Okay, so now we have these foundation walls. But what if only part of this wall, so let's say it slopes down to the north over here. So this is the back, there's the front. Oops. I don't know why it's doing that. Oops. Okay, so let's say it slopes down a bit. You can draw in the grade line, or you need to draw in the grade line. If you don't know it yet, you can estimate. So you can either do something like, just a standard, half of it's going to be above grade, half below. Or, let's say on the other side over here, if you know the grade line, or you know it's going to be a pretty dramatic drop or something, just draw on the real line and then, draw whatever the grade is. And now you've drawn two different clickable components here. This is important when we get into the next step here, which is assigning the boundary conditions on each side. So now what I have here is a model with a basement, foundation wall, so two different assemblies here separated by this line. And then part of this foundation wall is below grade and part of it is above grade. Okay. So the next thing I'm going to do is assign the boundary conditions. So if anyone has downloaded the plugin, first off, you might need to close SketchUp and reopen it to see the plugin. But along the top drop downs of your screen, you'll see either extensions or it'll say plugins, depending on the version you have. So mine says extensions. You should see a WUFI Plus plugin, and it has zones, export geometry, and save geometry. So if you download the plugin, you should have that. What this does is it allows us to assign WUFI Plus properties to our geometry here. So the first thing I'm going to do is open just an example here. I right-clicked on the component and I selected WUFI Plus properties, and I got this box popped up here. So I got to pick the type. It's either not relevant, opaque, transparent, or opening. We're not going to use opening today. Not relevant would be any sort of geometry that you didn't want to import into WUFI Passive. So a key thing to note here is that if it doesn't have WUFI Plus properties assigned to it, it will not import into WUFI Passive. It doesn't matter if it's in your SketchUp model. If it's not assigned WUFI Plus properties, it will not come into the WUFI Passive model. So you could either assign it as not relevant or just don't assign it anything, and it won't come into the model. The next thing you need to do is assign the temperature or boundary condition on the inner side and outer side. So the inner side here, I have zone 1. How do you know which side is inner and which is outer? The red arrow down here always points to the outer side. So I'm going to say the inner side is zone 1. I'm making a single zone building right here. And then the outer side is outer air. Oh no, this is ground. I apologize. So we just made that foundation wall. That this part is below grade and it slopes. So here's above grade and here's below grade. So this portion I will assign as ground on the outer side. If this was an above grade wall, like up here, I would assign outer air on the outer side. If this was a wall that was right next to an apartment with the same conditions, I would say it's adiabatic or adiabatic. So there's no heat transfer in the wall. Okay, if it was an interior partition wall, I could say zone 1 is on both sides. And when I show you the multi-zone model, you'll see that maybe sometimes there's zone 1 on one side and zone 2 on the other side. So it depends on what you're looking at. But here, I'm going to put ground. I'm going to say, okay. I would need to do that for all of my components. I've assigned it to all of the components that were originally imported into the model. But I have not done it for these additional basement model pieces. So a way to quickly do it is you can select Shift and select multiple pieces at once. So if they have like properties, you can select them all. So I selected these 3, which are outer air on the outside and zone 1 on the inside. And then I can right click WUFI plus properties. I think the webinar is slowing it down a little bit. Here we go. Okay, so I have opaque. So it's an opaque component here, right? It's a wall. Inner side is zone 1, outer side is outer air, and the red orientation is okay. So let me show you an example where the red orientation is not okay. Real quick. Okay. So I'm going to add WUFI plus properties to this below grade wall here. Okay. So I say type is opaque. Inner side is zone 1. Outer side is ground. Remember, this was sloping. This is the grade line here. And then orientation, the red arrow is pointing in. We want the red arrow to point to the outer side always. So either you can say reverse by export, so then when it goes into WUFI passive, this arrow will flip. But I think it's much easier to just flip the face in SketchUp and just save the right SketchUp geometry. So I'll show you how to do that. So I'm going to say it's okay. And now I'm going to go into this piece and I'm going to say reverse faces. So now as I select WUFI plus properties, the red arrow is facing the right way. So I say okay. And I think I need to do that for this piece as well. Assign the WUFI plus properties. Opaque, zone 1 on the inside, ground on the outer side, and the red arrow is pointing out, so we're okay. We've done this also for the slab, which we've already done, and we've also already assigned off the windows. But a quick way to do all the windows would be to select Shift, group as many as you want. Oops. And then right click, WUFI plus properties. It's taking a second. But these will be transparent components. So it'll come up as the type is transparent. Transparent, inner side is zone 1, outer side is outer air, and then you can see these red arrows are facing the right direction. So we say okay. All right, so that is how the general extent of the building model. Typically, yes, this is probably not something you use outside of WUFI passive. It might be a completely different model, depending on how detailed your typical SketchUp model is, but typically it's more detailed than this. So it might be something you have to create as a standalone SketchUp model, but the good news is it's pretty simple to create once you know your geometry. You can also use a trick where you trace over maybe just the boundary or the exterior boundary maybe of like your windows and your walls in a more detailed model, and then just export the simplified pieces. That's a trick we've used here. Okay, so after I've drawn my SketchUp model and I've assigned all my components that will be plus properties, I will go into extensions or plugins, WUFI plus, save geometry. So I'm going to call this webinar single family, and I'm going to save it. So you notice it's saving as a WPS file. That's what we're looking for here, WUFI passive SketchUp file. I'm going to save. I'm going to replace it. And that is the file type we will open in WUFI passive. So you're not going to file save or save as. You go to save as. I don't think it even lets you. It just saves as a SketchUp model. So it's important that you always go to extensions, WUFI plus, save geometry to save the WPS file, or you will not find that WPS file or the right file when you go to import into WUFI passive. All right, so now that we've saved the WPS file, I'm going to open WUFI passive. It's the general screen here, a blank file. I'm going to go into building, where it shows you there's these other ways to get the 3D geometry. So there's a building wizard where you can draw the geometry within WUFI passive. There's a SketchUp import, WPS right here. The GBXML import, which is more like a Revit or some other program. We're just going to touch on SketchUp today. So I'm going to click SketchUp import. And I did webinar single family, open. And there is my imported model. Oops. So I'm sure, spinning around, so it looks like. Okay. One trick is, remember how we had to assign the outer side here, the inner and outer side, and then tell it if the red arrow is facing the right way? Just to make sure we've done that correctly, it doesn't look too complicated for a building this size, but when you're getting larger buildings, it might be harder to determine if it was done correctly. There's a trick, or like a quick workaround we do. You go into Options, Colors, and we just quickly change the outer wall inner surface color. So this would mean any of my outer walls out here are assigned white if they're an inner surface. So this would mean that the inside is facing out. So I'm going to just assign it to green real quick. I'm going to say OK. And this quickly shows me that one of my walls is facing the wrong way, right? Because it's considering an inner surface. So this, instead of being oriented east as it should be, it's actually oriented west, and it thinks that that side inside is actually the right side. So we want to flip this wall. So I'm going to do that by expanding this window by using this tool right here, expand shrink window. And I'm going to ungroup this component. So you'll see in the 3D visualization, you can tell what's grouped by the lines enclosing it. The red is what you've selected, and then the orange is everything else in that group. So it grouped it based on inclination and then type. So your windows are all grouped, walls are all grouped. If you have multiple roof pieces, they'd be grouped. Multiple ground pieces would be grouped, etc. And these are connected to ground, so they are not grouped with the above group. Okay, so I'm going to ungroup my main component. You could either ungroup all of them or just main. Just ungroup this one. And then also, it lets me. Let me click on that. Okay, I'll do the top one first. I'm going to change the orientation inner to outer. Oh, it looks like these two are grouped somehow. Okay, so I changed the orientation inner to outer, and it flipped the faces on those walls. So now we know that all of our outer walls are actually facing the right direction. And they do have this little green arrow in here that show you which way it's direct pointing, but don't get that confused with the axis, which is this longer green arrow. So that little green arrow is pointing inside, and we can't see it now. So now I flipped them in the right direction. So then I can go back and change my colors to the default if I wanted to. Say OK. For windows, there's not really a better trick to make sure they're pointing the right direction, but it is typically more evident if that green arrow is facing the right way or not, because they're coming right out of the center of the window there. It's very evident when you are looking at it in the small screen. So these are all facing the right direction. Okay. A couple other things you can look at after you've imported your geometry is the orientation. So you look at my window here, and then there's a north, south, east, west here, compass, and it shows you the orientation that it imported as. If you set the orientation in SketchUp, it should import correctly, or it just defined this as my south side, based on how I drew it within the axes of SketchUp. So how would I change that? I would go into change orientation, and you can either change it based on the cardinal directions or the 45 degrees between them. So let's say if I did that, it changed this main facade to southeast. Or you can change it based on the actual angle. So I can input it, or I can drag it to whichever side I'm changing this dominant front face to. So you change the orientation to make sure your building is oriented the correct way. So do that like first thing, and not after you start getting results and trying to tweak your building model. Make sure it's oriented correctly first. The second thing you can do, I typically do this, is like a quick check to make sure the units were correct and everything kind of matches up from your SketchUp model to your WUFI passive model. I'm just going to click on a single window. And what this does is it tells me information about that window. It tells me the area here, 33 square feet. And then it tells me the total area of the windows in that group, or whatever's in that group. It might be walls. So I'm just going to like quickly look. It shows me the window width is 6 feet. That looks about right. And so it's about 5 feet in height. So that's about right. You want to make sure you're not off by like a scale of 10 or something, or maybe you're using metric and SketchUp. I don't know. You just want to make sure these are correct. The reason, well, there's a couple reasons, but a lot of the different inputs in WUFI Passive can detect it from the visualized geometry, so you need to make sure this is right. And also the heat losses are calculated through these exterior dimensions, so this should all be correct. You can do this for a wall too instead of a window. Look at the area. Look at the area of the total grouped walls here. Okay, what else can we do? Okay, so I think that's really it for looking at the model once you've imported it. Obviously, you want to make sure every window you've drawn is imported and all the walls, so you make sure you have a ground under here and everything. Let's say I didn't. Let's say I forgot the ground. You can draw it really easily in WUFI Passive, which I'll show you, or you can always go back to the SketchUp model and draw it in, reassign it, and then re-import it. It's really up to you. I would probably always go back to the SketchUp model, just so you have a nice version, a final version of the WPS file to import, rather than making a bunch of edits in WUFI Passive, but this is a pretty quick one. So I'll show you that real quick. The way we would do this is using vertices. So I'm just going to select all the vertices in the ground, or enclosing the ground piece. I'm just going to take these 4, and I'm going to make a component of the selected vertices. And then it asks me, or did I might have selected those out of order. There we go. I think I selected them in a crisscross pattern, so it made a crisscross over there. So you need to select them in the order that you would like the component made. I'm going to make an opaque component. I'm going to make zone 1 on the inner side. I'm going to make ground on the outer side. Say OK. So now I have my ground piece back. It looks like it's facing the wrong way. I could only tell that because it's white. So that's why I changed it to green. It's kind of hard to differentiate between these two colors. But this is facing the wrong way, and this is facing the right way. So there's the little arrow here, and the arrow disappears when I do that. If this was lime green, it would be very obvious which one was facing inside and which was facing outside. Okay. Looks like I only have about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to try to breeze through the rest of this. That's the general importing. I'm not sure why my mouse is doing that. The general importing from SketchUp. So the next thing I wanted to show was a multi-zone model. So here we have a larger building where we zoned out a couple worst case units. So the first thing we'll look at is we zoned out this southwest corner unit here. So there's a lot of surface area and then a lot of gains here. So we figured this might be a warm unit relative to the rest of the building. And then we have this colder unit, maybe only facing north, a lot of envelope losses. Actually, if anyone's watching the webinar that Graham is doing first week in December, he did a resiliency model on either this unit or this unit, a northwest unit in this building that we're looking at. So it's pretty cool. I recommend signing up for that. Okay, so basically you need to draw out all of the boundaries that enclose the unit that you're looking for, or the zone that you're looking for. It doesn't necessarily need to be a unit. I could have drawn multiple zones within this model. So let's say I had like a lot of grass, maybe right here on the front, and I wanted to see if this particular zone got warmer than the rest of the house. You can only do that in the dynamic side of the model. Look at the conditions in different zones. If you're in the static model, you're going to get overall building results. So it's going to combine the results from all of the zones, or combine the heat loss and heat gain from all of the zones, and you're going to get whole building results. Zones come into play when you're looking at the dynamic model. So then you can model and simulate all the temperature conditions and different mechanical systems in different zones. Okay, so back to this project. Okay, so here's this top floor warm case zone. The first thing you need to do is tell the model how many condition zones you're using. You do that by going to the plugin or extensions, WUFI Plus, and then zones. So it looks like this one, I put 4 condition zones are in here. It could be 20, it could be 2, it could be, however many you're modeling here. So you have to tell it how many condition zones you have. And say okay. And now you'll see when I change the WUFI Plus properties of these boundaries I've used to enclose my zone. I have the option to pick between zones 1 through 4 on the inner side and zones 1 through 4 on the outer side. So I'm looking at the roof here of this zone 3 model, or this northwest case. So I guess we assign this warm room or warm unit as zone 3. So the inner side is zone 3, outer side is outer air. Orientation is okay. And then we are going to pick these walls and also the surface below it. So anything enclosing the space. Go look at the WUFI Plus properties. So now I have type is opaque. Inner side is zone 3, so that's where the arrow is coming from. So inside this zone is zone 3, or inside this geometry here. Outer side is zone 1. So we made the whole building still zone 1, and then we zoned out, I think, 2 or 3 extra zones. So this is zone 3. So it's looking at this wall. I think you would draw this partition line to the exterior of the zone 3 wall, and then the walls kind of build in from there. So this is the exterior extents of that unit. So this is the hallway you can use right here, but it's not drawn. This is the exterior wall of that unit. Say okay. One other thing to note while I'm thinking about it, you'll see these. This is just a parapet wall. It's not affecting anything in the model. It's just here kind of for visualization. If I look at the WUFI Plus properties, I have outer air assigned on both sides, which is true. It's outer air on the top or on this side, and then outer air on the other side. It comes into the model because I've assigned it as opaque, so we will see it in the model, but it doesn't affect the overall energy balance because it's not part of the thermal envelope. This is how you draw something like shading as well, like a shading element or an overhang that didn't have like any conditioned space on either side of the overhang. It would just be assigned with outer air on both sides, and you call it opaque, or well, probably not transparent, so it'd be opaque. One more thing. Actually, I think that was all I was going to note. Okay, so that's kind of what you would do with zones. Again, just completely enclose whatever space you're looking at, just so you can tell it where one zone ends and where the other zone begins. And then assign those WUFI Plus properties the same way you would do it if you were assigning like the other zones or the exterior boundaries here. Okay, so I'm going to look at what that looks like in WUFI Passive. So I've already imported this into WUFI Passive here for you. We were looking at this unit up here. Oops. We were looking at this southwest unit. So you can see it there. Another way to look at the different zones is to go through the list here. So zone 1 is most of the building. Zone 2 is this northwest unit on the top over here. It's kind of hard to see because it's so little. That's what that is. Zone 3 is over here. So it's that southwest unit we're looking at. I think this one has zone 4 is the crawl space. Yeah, the crawl space beneath the conditioned space for apartments. And zone 5 is the parking garage. But that's what it ends up looking like. So instead of having everything under one zone, it comes out into 5, or however many you've assigned. Let's say I didn't want to keep these apartments unit zoned out. I wanted to add them to the total, or to the just zone 1. I just want one zone for interior or conditioned space. You can always change the properties of these different components within the WUFI Passive model. So Same thing if you accidentally assigned your whole wall as a window or transparent or something. When it comes in the WUFI passive model, you can change the properties. So I'm going to show you here. These are the walls on either side of zone 3, and on the outer side it says zone 1. I can change the inner side to zone 1 and outer side to zone 1, and it becomes part of that zone. So you can see now it's visualizing as a component in zone 1 rather than in zone 3. So if I were to go back and I change this roof from inner side from zone 3 to zone 1, now it's part of zone 1. So I'm slowly eliminating the pieces of zone 3 and making just zone 1. So now we're not really zoning out this apartment anymore. We're just adding it to the rest of the building. So I can also do this for all the windows in here. Zone 1, and then zone 3 just has this floor. Now this bottom floor, so I can put zone 1 on both sides. So now I don't really have anything for zone 3. There's no visualized components. So you could set up your model so that it could be zoned out later, and make it one zone, but maybe draw those interior partitions just in case you want to do it later. But you can always import new geometry as well later on, like for a dynamic model. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to show you is a trick for the taller buildings, or the buildings that have a lot of windows. So when you get into creating like thousands of window components, it takes slightly longer to import it into WUFI passive. We saw that first example, it took like 5 seconds to get this in there. So it's relatively quick until you increase the number of components. This was like 38 components, until you increase it to like 10,000 components, and then it starts to slow down a bit. So here's a trick that we use in our office. Let's say we're doing this tower here. Let's see. This is what it looks like. And then it has these uniform windows kind of across it. So there's 5 windows across. Let me just have it on all sides for simplicity for this example. We would come in, we'd create this. We just create one row of these windows. You could just even create one really, but you create the whole first floor if you'd like. You need to create at least one per wall to use this trick I'm going to show. And then you'd assign the WUFI plus properties. So I'd say this is transparent. I'd probably group them all at once, and then assign it as transparent with zone 1 on the inside, outer air on the outside, and then facing the direction of the red arrow. It's okay. So once everything's assigned, which it should be, I didn't assign it here. I'd previously done that. I would go to extensions, WUFI plus, save geometry. I'm going to call it the tower example, save. Now I'm going to go into WUFI passive, back to that building branch again, where I'd import the WPS file, and I go into SketchUp import. I'm going to pick the tower example WPS file. And now I have my tower. You can see all the windows across the bottom, showing the orientation here. Okay, so what I want to do is copy all these windows up uniformly up this facade. So what I'm going to do is select one wall, whichever wall I want to start with, and then I pick windows and openings over here on the left, or I right click on it and I pick windows and openings. So it's either this window box, or I right click windows and openings, and it shows me the wall with the windows drawn on it. And there's a couple ways to add windows. Here's one way, a list. So it shows me the placement on the X and Y axis of all my windows. So they're all at Y3, and then the X placement varies. And then they're all the same width and height. So I could just copy and make a bunch of these in here and assign it the correct X and Y, and they would show up. Or if they're all uniform, I'll start with one. I'll copy one and I'll right click, copy and move. Let's say I want to put it 10 feet above the window. So the DX is starting from the left-hand side of the window. So if they were like 3 feet wide, right, I need to do at least 3 feet DX, because I can't place a window on top of another window. And then a DY is from the bottom of the window to the next bottom of the window. So I'm going to pick 10 feet, and I'm just going to put one window there. And now I have another window right above it. Even easier is just selecting all by copying over the corners, copy and move, DY. I'm going to put 10 feet, And I'm going to say let's do this for the whole building. So there's 10 stories, and I have one drawn. I need the other 9. Say okay. And now I have all my windows on the facade. And I say okay, and now I have, an additional like 45 windows, just like that. I think this is quicker than trying to draw them in SketchUp, assign them all in SketchUp, and then increase the import time as well. So I could go around and do this for each facade, but it's really the same. Let's see. You can also draw windows right on here by saying new, telling it the size, here, the width and the height, the shape, and then the placement on the X and Y. So if I wanted to do 10 and 20, so I'm putting it right here. Make a circular window, the 4-foot radius. So that was the corner of it. I can move this around too. I can move these windows around. Yeah, so you can do a lot in the 3D visualizer just with edits. And I think that is all I have for you guys today. So I'm going to close out and I'm going to try to figure out how to open the questions pane.
Hey, I can read those out for you if you like.
Okay. I can see them actually. Okay. So I have a problem which is probably too late. It says it's very echoey. I apologize for that. So it says it's fairly understandable. Does the WUFI work with all versions of the SketchUp, including new SketchUp 2016? It should. I haven't tried 2016, but I have 2015 and it works. So it really should. It came out yesterday. Okay. So this next question says, has the plugin been tested with the new SketchUp 2016 that came out yesterday? No, but we can test it. I'm assuming it works. It's worked with all versions up till now. Okay, the next question is for a slab on grade condition. Would the bottom plane probably underfloor insulation be assigned to ground? So yes. So that would be like, let's see, dock that. For this condition, the bottom here, this would be assigned to ground. So anything that was actually the ground condition would be assigned to ground, not outer air. Here's the questions. Okay. If you had a concrete outside porch that was attached to the foundation, do you account for this in the SketchUp model or separately as a thermal bridge and will be passive? That would be a thermal bridge, yeah. So you would use therm to calculate the heat loss if you had a continuous concrete slab. I don't recommend doing that. I recommend breaking that concrete slab up between, like if you had a slab on grade condition and then an outside porch. So yeah, that would be a different condition. You would not need to draw this in the 3D visualizer if it's a porch outside of the thermal envelope. Will there be a webinar on calculating thermal bridges in the future, or is there one already? Sure, we can do one. There's a class on it. I don't know if a webinar can actually, I don't know if that's enough time. Typically, it's like a 4-hour class minimum. But there is a therm tutorial guide that's available for purchase on the PHIUS website. I think it's $75. It has a bunch of therm example files, all of the presentation from the 4-hour class, as well as therm software, which therm software is free online. But if you want to do a self-study, there is a downloadable package online. Okay. How to set up zones, I think I covered that. Can you touch on the next steps? Assigning thermal bridges, that's all within WUFI Passive. So if I were to go on my WUFI Passive model, there's a thermal bridges branch here, and that's where you input the thermal bridges. So it's not anything particular to the 3D visualizer. It's actually an input in the WUFI Passive model. Well, I have a follow-up webinar on dynamic model in the WUFI Passive. Again, this is something that's like a 2-day class. so probably not a webinar. Maybe one on SketchUp imports into the dynamic side. It's a little bit differences, like I said, but it probably won't be a webinar format. There would be a separate class for that. Do you have to have SketchUp Pro? No, I don't think I do. I just have a free version of SketchUp, so that's all you need. When drawing windows in SketchUp, how accurate do you need to be with size and placement of windows on the SketchUp model? Size is very important. Placement is not that important. So size, you do need to use the actual window size because it greatly affects, transmission losses through the frame and the glass, and also solar gains. So size is important. Placement, it really only knows the orientation. There's no like spatial resolution, so it doesn't know when a window is right next to another window. So not quite as important. If you're getting into zones and zoning off like a room with a big window looking for localized overheating, placement's important. Try to get it as close as possible, but it's not absolutely critical. Okay, could you go over drawing the window dimensions in SketchUp again? Do you draw to the exterior dimensions of the window or the rough opening, or do you draw just the glass area? Really, it's preferred, I think, to just draw the exterior dimensions of the window. If you draw the rough opening, depending on how large that is, typically that can't be that big, especially for these buildings that were very airtight. So you're trying to get that rough opening as close to the actual window size as possible, and then just sealing in between that. But if you do like add a ½ inch on each side of the window for a rough opening, that can start to overestimate solar gains because the glazing area gets bigger as you add dimension to that window. So try to just draw the exterior dimensions of the window. And then the rough opening, I guess, kind of gets drawn into the model when you input the installation thermal bridge around the window. So it kind of covers it there. Can you give us guidance on the status of WUFI Passive versions? Yeah, so the free version of WUFI Passive is out. If anyone needs instructions on how to download that, you can email me, lisa@passivehouse.us. You can download WUFI 3.0 for free online. I'm not sure what the status specifically you want on the paid version. Nothing's really changed there. You can still buy 1 year, 3 year, or 10-year licenses. Revit to SketchUp to WUFI. Is it worth it, or what's the best way to get out of Revit and into WUFI? Right now, the Revit plugin isn't perfect because of how Revit assigns things as spaces rather than kind of the exterior dimensions of the building. So right now, we've only been able to get it to import spaces, which use internal dimensions rather than external, which is what we want. So the best way is, I guess, to try to get a Revit into a SketchUp model, then assign the components, and then into WUFI Passive. But the Revit model is kind of still in process of working perfectly. The SketchUp plugin is pretty, not flawless, but it works pretty well. When designing a multifamily or apartment building, does each apartment need to be drawn and assigned as a new zone? No. I was kind of trying to illustrate that there with the beach green. Typically, you just need to look at a couple worst case conditions. So you pick what you think might be the worst case for the heating. So what's the coldest unit? Least amount of solar gain and most amount of transmission losses. So what's the most exposed? And then also like a worst case cooling condition, which I showed was like that southwest. So it had the most amount of glass, and it also had like direct exposure to the roof on the top. So you should look at the worst case conditions, try to optimize those, and then by doing that, inherently you should be okay with those in between cases. Meaning, what do you get within the free versus paid? Okay, so the question on the status of the WUFI Passive versions. What do you get in free versus paid? We didn't really talk about any of the differences today. You still get to use the SketchUp importer for the free version. A couple of things that are different are the databases. So you have this nice database, import and export of databases, materials, assemblies, windows, different climates and all of that. You don't get user-defined databases within the free version, which means if you were to go in and make your project and create all these different assemblies and different window types that maybe you use a lot in your projects, then you don't get to save those and use them later. So that's a big thing, is using databases. You can't import climate data in the free version, but you can just type it in. So there's a text field here to just type it in. But you can't just do the straight import of the climate file, which is much quicker. I'm not going to go into that. Those are two of the main big things for the static side. Dynamic, you can't do hydrothermal simulation with the free version. Those are the biggest things, I'd say. Will you follow up on webinar on static inputs on the same basic house? Would be a great refresher. I've actually already done that. So that was this basic house. I don't know if you guys can see behind this Carpiac house. It's in Pennsylvania. It is on the PHIUS webinar archive. It's a 2-hour tutorial. I think I did it maybe in April. It's a 2-hour tutorial just of inputting the building start to finish in WUFI Passive. So starting at the SketchUp model, importing, putting all the inputs in, and getting results. So that is online under the PHIUS webinar archive. Okay. For window size, to use window size or rough opening, I think I covered that. Use the actual window size. Rob and everyone that has an older version. So Rob asked, I have an older version of WUFI about a year ago. How do I get the upgrade? You do this by logging into the WUFI web shop. There's like a login page. You had to create a login to download any of the software. And you go to My Orders. It's a tab across the top. And then you should be able to see the WUFI Passive order you have of the older version and say upgrade. It will give you the upgrade package to download as well as the license key. Next question is, how are neighboring shading elements, i.e. buildings and trees, dealt with? You have to input those as either horizontal obstructions or just shading inputs on the static side. If you wanted to draw them in on the dynamic side, you could to make it actually calculate in the model. But in the static side, you still have to tell them if there's a neighbor, 30 feet away and the roof ridge is 30 feet above my window sill. You still have to input all of that. Okay. And the last question is exterior dimension of the window accounting for over insulation, so window exposed window dimensions? No. It's the actual window dimensions. So if you have a 4x6 window, you input, 4 feet in one direction, 6 feet in the other direction. The over insulation gets accounted for only in the side installation value or the corner bridge value for the window installation. And it also gets accounted for in like the reveal shading, so the shading from window being inset in the wall. And I think that's it for questions. Looks like that's the end of it, unless I missed something. And I apologize for the echo. Maybe we can fix it in the reformat. I'm not sure for the recorded version that goes online.
Hey, Lisa, that was great. You sounded pretty good over here.
Okay.
I just wanted to mention that I was following along on the question and answer portion, and so many of these links that Lisa mentioned, I have added to the follow-up thank you email that you will receive in about an hour after we've wrapped up here. It'll have links to WUFI Passive Free, and it'll have links to the old webinar that Lisa did in April, and a few other things that were just mentioned in the Q&A, and also your self-report link for receiving CPHC credit for this event.
Great, thank you, Katrina. One more thing I just thought of. If you guys do have more follow-up questions specific to WUFI Passive or specific to SketchUp, whichever, Katrina will also add a link to the forum which you can use as a PHIUS member. If you're a PHIUS member, where you can post questions and we'll publicly answer. So a lot of you probably will have the same questions. So that's a great resource to use. And she'll give you a link to get to that forum in your follow-up email as well.
Sure will.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a nice afternoon.